welcome to my live chat. I am so excited today to have Ashley Carter and Jasmine Westbrooks from Eat Well Exchange with me. And we are going to be talking about how to create greater access to healthy plant-based foods. So hi, Ashley and Jasmine. How are you?
Great.
So good to have you. I just wanted to introduce Ashley and Jasmine because they're dietitians. We're both, we're all colleagues, and they just are doing this amazing work with Eat Well Exchange. They're directors of Eat Well Exchange, which is a nonprofit organization with the primary goal of bridging the gap in health outcomes by guiding communities to make positive lifelong changes while respectfully maintaining their culture, which I love. So could we just start out and you guys could just tell us a little bit about Eat Well Exchange? What is it that you're doing with this project? And we want to hear more about it.
Yeah, so there's a story behind Eat Well Exchange. I mean, when we first started, we were both just kind of like, hi, I'm Jazz, I'm Ash, kind of introducing ourselves. And then we started to hang out more, and we both worked at a facility. It was actually WIC. And we noticed like a little gap in between like access to food, nutrition education with lower socioeconomic communities. But even beyond that, just the focus of culture behind it, as people of color, we don't see it often where we're told to eat foods that we grew up on and we have a preference to or that's familiar to us. And we saw that a lot, unfortunately, between the client or the patient and with healthcare professionals. So one day we're just out having girls' time, and we're talking about, let's change the world. Like, we need to change this. Like, we can be that staple to do that. We can be, that dietitian to do so. And keep in mind, we weren't even dietitians yet. We were considered nutrition educators, and we were trying to change the world. But yeah, we're going to do this. And then there's plenty of stories later on to show that. But later on, as we started to really dive into Eat Well Exchange, we noticed that, wow, the people that we're serving were actually a lot of the things that we went through ourselves, and we thought it was normal, but it really wasn't. So that's kind of a little bit of how Eat Well Exchange pretty much started.
That's great. Ashley, what was your journey like in this whole field?
Well, my journey in the field of dietetics was very interesting. I can tell you that I became a dietitian in 2019, and I graduated college 2011. So that shows you there was a big gap in between me finishing college and becoming a dietitian, just because there was a lot of barriers. Finances was a huge one. I was afraid to do the internship, not because I didn't think I would do well, but just because I financially felt like, well, how could I survive for 10 months without a paycheck? So there was a lot of barriers like that when it comes to just being a dietitian and then looking up the salaries of dietitians and saying, okay, is this worth it? And all those other things. But for me, what kept me going was just knowing my family history, knowing that, my mother passed from diabetes. My dad was, he passed away as well from cancer. And just knowing that the health of my family could have changed if we knew better, if we knew more about nutrition, if it was focused on, if it was talked about, because neither one of my parents have ever been to a dietitian. So that just shows you that, they had health issues, but not once did someone recommend a dietitian. So it's important what we're doing. So it really just propelled me to continue to become a registered dietitian. And then I knew the moment that I became one that I would be able to make that impact to the community that, that needs it the most.
I love what you said about that. Well, first of all, I think a lot of people who are listening to this who aren't registered dietitians, we have a lot of dietitians who follow us and everything, and champion all of our work. I know they champion your work. I'm always following what you're doing. It's so wonderful. But I think there's a misperception that, dietitians are not paid very well. We're on the lower ladder of the healthcare professions. And it takes a lot to become a dietitian. We have to have 4 years of education. Now we have to have that plus a master's and a 1-year internship. And we have to stay on top of our profession because nutrition changes all the time. But I feel like the people that work in this field, like you, the both of you, we do what we love because we know we make a difference. We're passionate about that, because food is so much. It's nutrition, it's health, it's love, it's all of these things. It's story, it's culture. So we do what we love. And sometimes it takes a little bit of engineering to figure out how you're going to get through school, because if you have those school bills, you're not going to get some big paycheck to help you pay it back,
Right.
So I'm glad you pointed that out. And I'm just really proud of all the work you guys are doing in the area. So one of the things, I hear all the time about, and I'd love to hear your thoughts, is that, I get this all the time when I talk about healthy food. I'm always out there, promoting more whole plant-based foods. And, people will say, well, how can it be affordable for everybody? I'm always showing pictures of my farmer's market and it's that kind of food is not always accessible, unfortunately. So could you talk a little bit about those barriers for healthy, delicious, beautiful plant-based foods?
Well, I would say that the first barrier is education. For most people, they feel that in order for them to eat healthy, they have to go to Whole Foods or they need to go to Trader Joe's or they have to go to a farmer's market. And in some areas, that's just not available. Like I can tell you where I grew up in Liberty City, there's never been a farmer's market there. There's not access to it. There's not even a major grocery store where I grew up. So it's hard when you're living in certain conditions to have access to, the fresh and beautiful, pretty, fruits and vegetables. But the main thing is just educating those communities that whatever you can have access to utilize it, whether it's frozen vegetables, whether it's canned vegetables, no matter what, whatever you have access to, try to purchase that. And also just kind of getting out of the bad habits. Like a lot of times families will spend a lot of money on juice because they think their kids need fruit juice, but really they don't. So it's just changing that mindset and just kind of reconstructing their plate to teach them how they can continue to do the things that they like, what they're currently doing, but just modify it slightly based off of what's available to them.
That's great feedback. So it really starts with the education.
Definitely.
And I like that you said that because, I think there's a lot of, as you say, there's so much misperception, widespread misperception among many people about what it costs to eat a healthy diet. And in turn, like you have to have these superfoods or like you're talking about, you have to have juice and it could be something really simple and wholesome like beans and peanut butter and, so what about you, Jasmine? Do you have any thoughts about some of these barriers?
Yeah, because like Ashley grew up in Liberty City, their situation, of course, was nutrition education and access. But for me, it was more about the education, but also the access of just like the food kind of appearing to actually want to buy. Because I have stories, going to the grocery store and honestly, the bologna and the things like that look more appetizing versus, that rotting piece of spinach that's overpriced. So I think with that, there's so much that goes into it. There's so much like policy work that goes into it that needs to happen. And we need to continue to push for it to change. But until then, it's about creating the access behind it. And I love how Ashley mentioned too about nutrition education, because you could put, honestly, the greatest Whole Foods, Trader Joe's, all these awesome grocery stores in the middle of a low income neighborhood, but they will still go in there and buy the unhealthy options because they're not educated in the sense of how to choose the foods that are healthier for them. And I know I use this in a lot of teaching too, as far as education. I really have them think outside the box. Those juices, like Ashley mentioned, those juices aren't going to make you full, right? So they're cheap, but they're not going to make you full and you're going to continue to eat more and more food. But if you eat some of these higher fiber foods, still make them taste great, make it a family tradition, and then you can be full longer. Therefore, you're going to spend less on food. So it's kind of about having them think in a different, like Ashley said, mindset about what type of foods to buy and how to gain access or even create your own access, which is what we're doing a little bit with the gardening classes.
Yeah. Can you tell me a little bit more about the gardening classes? Because I am passionate about gardening. It's my thing. And just a little background about me is my parents were both farmer. I mean, they grew up on farms in Arkansas. My mother was from Arkansas, my dad from Minnesota. And so we always, even when we lived in the suburbs, we grew our own food. And that's always just, I think that's why I became a dietitian, because that was just part of our life, and I love what you're doing because that's our history with, people grew their own food, even, you'd have your little kitchen garden and, or you'd share your neighbor had too many apples on the tree. So you went and got the apples, and we've just lost that connection. So Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're trying to do to rebuild that connection?
Yeah, I think it's so important. And it's funny because me and Ashley were just having this conversation a couple weeks ago, and it hit me. I'm like, wow, my grandmother had a garden that she shared with her neighbor. And that was her way of creating access because the grocery store wasn't as close as she would have loved it to be. And she actually gave food out to different people in the community who may needed it. So it's funny because it's like full circle. You know, me being in that garden, honestly, I did not like it because I was like, it's hot outside. I'm a kid. I want to play. I don't want to be in a garden, you know, picking different produce. But now I love it. And it's so important to teach the kids and even adults. We've had some adults that are surprised of how their vegetables look that they usually eat on their plates, or maybe they don't eat on their plate, but now they know how it looks because they created from a seed to actual harvest. It's like, I want to try it now because this is something that I produced. So for me, it goes deeper. It's like a connection of that hand and that, you know, in that soil to really have that creation of they created this. This is their own. And it's kind of like an ownership that they can be proud of. And I'm just so happy that we've been able to provide that experience for a few communities. And now we've even switched to virtual gardening and potting classes to get people more involved and excited about different produce that they may like in the season.
I just love that. Yeah, I just think that connection. And you know, we all know that there's research in this area that shows the benefits, you know, the health benefits. And I know I've worked with children, volunteered with children, teaching them to first grow the food in their school gardens, then go take it in the kitchen. And kids that would never eat vegetables were eating them all because they had so much pride, as you just talked about, you know. I mean, there's nothing more beautiful than picking a pea right off the vine, you know, eating it raw, you know, and that luscious tomato. There's so much pride in that, you know, you're going to enjoy it and value it. And I think kids can learn that lesson so early. So, you know, I think that's really great. Have you got any great stories that you could share about what you've seen with families learning to grow? I bet you do. Love to hear.
There's plenty. I think of this one as a funny story just because, you know, some people aren't aware that there are white sweet potatoes. So we actually had a mom and her daughter come to the garden and were picking the white sweet potatoes and didn't realize they were white in the inside, took them home. And she was like, oh no, Jasmine, I threw them away because I thought they were spoiled. And I'm like, no, this is how they're supposed to be. So again, it goes back to the education part, right? Like how that's so important because everybody's not going to be exposed to the same type of sweet potatoes. And it's not to say that one sweet potato is better than the other, you know, or it's not to say that this sweet potato is spoiled and this one isn't. It's just to really teach them and say, this is possible and this is what you may see. So I really think that it's been like an eye opener, especially not just for children, actually for their parents as well, you know, so that's been fun. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, research shows that the kids are taking home those behaviors to the parents. So it's so important.
And another good success story that we have when it comes to gardening is our garden in Haiti. Because when it comes to the United States, we know with the pandemic, you know, everybody's life has shifted here. And we've had a lot of help when it comes to people getting, you know, stimulus, unemployment, and different things like that. In Haiti, that's not available. So if you lost your job, you just lost your job. If you can't go to school, you just can't go to school. There's not government aid to help them. But we started our garden there in 2019. And now the children are able to plant and grow themselves. A lot of them have started taking, you know, crops home to regrow for their family and different things like that. So now, even though the pandemic has been going on, the 35 families that we serve have still been able to bring produce home to their family. So for us, that was just like one of those moments because you see something like literally the seeds that they put in the ground is allowing them to continue to survive throughout this very rough time. So that's like one of those moments where you just really see, you know, what you're doing come to fruition.
You're so right. And I mean, I think that was a huge lesson in our modern food system to see how our food system was so fragile. Like you could literally not have produce or food during a certain period of time because it's lost our communities. We don't have it in our communities anymore. You can't just go to someone down the street who's growing produce, you know. So I think that's an important lesson that we need to have those more resilient local food systems too. And I was wondering if you have tips for people who want to get more involved in this. And, you know, we know that our country is getting more urbanized. People are leaving rural communities. So that means it's hard to have these opportunities to get your hands in the soil and grow food. So how can people get connected? Like, for example, I love community gardens. Is that something that you recommend? And you have your projects you're working on too to promote gardening. So, but what are ways people who live in the cities can have access to this?
Yeah, I always say if you have dirt, pot, and a seed, you're good to go. And that's one reason that we also started to really implement that potting class that's virtual. What we do is host a farmer, that we have a connection with, and have them come on and talk about starting the seed in the actual pot, which is awesome. And honestly, there are mistakes that you can make. I know, in our dietetics curriculum, that wasn't like a course on how to grow anything. So we did have to start from the beginning. And I think my thumb is getting a little bit greener, thank God, as I'm getting more and more experience and we're learning from each other, and just being that lifelong learner as well. But I would say start from the pot. My number one recommendation, if you're starting with potting soil and, a seed and your pot or your potting kit, just make sure you don't put that seed too deep in the soil, because that was my mistake for a long time. It needs to be roughly maybe an inch or two, in the soil, but not too much. But that would be my recommendation. Just start there. If you want to start with transplants, that's okay too. That's not considered cheating. Just start with the transplants if you don't want to get the seed. And then also just doing a little bit of research on, how big does this plant get? So you'll know how much room that you may have for the potting process. So that's another thing. And herbs are brilliant to start out with, especially if you feel like you don't have a green thumb.
Yeah, I love herbs. I always tell people the same thing, start with an herb pot, because they're so easy and they're so rewarding. Just to be able to, you could put it in your kitchen window, like where you're going to have a nice sunny window, and just to go get a handful of herbs to cook with. It's just makes the meal so much better. And I like to, if you just get one good tomato plant, it can bear so many tomatoes, or one good zucchini plant, like a healthy zucchini plant. It's amazing. Like, you don't have to have this huge area, and it does take a little experimenting, but, there's even research that shows how much money you can save. There's not that much of investment. Seeds are not that expensive. And my mother used to always save all of their seeds. They didn't even buy seeds because that was the way farmers did it, But anyway, it's not as hard as you might think it would be. And transplants are a great idea, because that's really foolproof. You just put it in a pot, or even if you just have a little area that you can put some soil in. So that's great. What about community gardens? Is that something that you connect people with in their communities too?
Go ahead, Ash.
Oh, sorry. So yes, we have worked with a lot of community gardens in the South Florida area. Typically, if we're doing any type of culinary class, we try to find a garden nearby. And a lot of times there's gardens and communities, and the community members, they don't know anything about it. They walk by it, drive by it every single day, and they don't even realize they have a garden there. And then it's hard, because that's why a lot of gardens fail, because they don't have community involvement. So we kind of help them a little bit with outreach. So just teaching the children that we're working with and their families that you have a garden a couple of steps away. And for most of the gardens, I think one of them in Hollandale, which is an area down here, they just charge, I think, $20 a year for you to have a plot of land. And you can grow whatever you want. And then some of like the main gardeners that come, they'll even help you tend your land. So it's not like you're on your own trying to figure things out, but most people just don't know about it, and they're intimidated by it, and they don't understand the process. So we work with gardens, and we just try to help connect them to the community, and also just bring the kids out to the garden, because a lot of times the kids will bring the parents, and sometimes the grandparents too. So we really just try to increase exposure for the gardens, and also increase the relationship with the students as well.
That's great. Yeah, I've seen a lot of community gardens where people don't understand, as you mentioned. And I've volunteered with some, and they'll say that, there's the older generation has been gardening, and now that, like, the newer generation doesn't, they're just forgetting it, and they're afraid that people won't come back and plant, so it does take a lot of involvement. And I think we can all help in our communities and do what we can to promote this, like what you're doing. I think it's great connection. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about, this idea about plant-based foods. I mentioned a little bit about superfoods. We love to talk about superfoods, whether it's chia seeds or quinoa or what, spinach or whatever it might be. But a lot of these foods are actually traditional ingredients. They're rustic. They were the core of diet patterns. And, what do you think about how we can reconnect people to some of these indigenous foods that were part of their culinary and nutrition past and kind of honor them in that sort of way, without getting all tangled up into like the Whole Foods phenomenon where, it has to be expensive and all that kind of thing.
And it's hard because that naturally happens. Like I can tell you as an example, growing up, my dad's from Trinidad, so he would always give us soursop. Like we would always drink a little bit of soursop in the morning, and he's like, just drink it. And soursop's good, so I'm not going to question it. But now that I'm older and I started to realize the benefits of soursop, there's actually a lot of research now that's like connecting soursop to like cancer treatment and prevention and different things like that. So it's like for us growing up, they knew that it was good for you, but they probably didn't know all the benefits, but it was just a part of our culture to just drink it. But now soursop is very expensive. So it would be impossible for me to have soursop every day now because it's so expensive. And that's usually what happens with superfoods, that it starts off as an indigenous food that we like and we enjoy. But then once it becomes, popular and trendy, now the people that originally enjoyed it can't afford it anymore. So it's hard. It's like learn about the foods, but don't exploit them to the point where now they're overpriced. And now there's all kind of, soursop pills and all kind of things like that. So it's like, just try to like appreciate it without owning it. I guess that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. Great. Very well put. Did you have anything to add to that, Jasmine?
Yeah, I would just say, think about, I guess, how many different friends or family members you have and kind of examine like what they may eat. That may not be what you see advertised as considered healthy food when you Google it, right? Because if we're honest, if we Google healthy food, sometimes it's like things like kale, but you may not have been exposed to kale, or maybe your grandmother didn't eat kale and that's what you weren't raised on. But instead, collard greens or turnip greens are looked at as negative because they associate it with, it's soul food, but it actually has just as much or even more benefits as your kale. So I would say just really look at, what your friends and families are doing, especially those who are, from generations some time ago, and see what were their habits regarding the foundational food. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some foods, right, in the soul food culture, yes, that if we add different things to it, it may not make it as healthy for us as it needs to be. But the foundation of the food itself is amazing. We just may need a little bit of editing with how it's prepared. As far as when we eat it or how we eat it. So I think it's so important to not think of just, quinoa is better than brown rice. But if you grew up on rice, then it's fine. Quinoa is just another grain that someone may eat, but you don't have to eat it to necessarily be healthy in a sense. So
that is really true. I love that because I think it's, it's really bringing, that microscope back to look at our food traditions and our food ways and actually investigate what are those healthy foods in our past. As my mother grew up in Arkansas, her job was to pick the wild greens they ate every day, so those were probably so healthy, and that was the green. And it's interesting because almost every culture has a wild green or some green that was a very important part of the diet. Yeah. So just go with those traditions and kind of look at those, talk to your family and explore all those really healthy foods. I love that. One of the questions I had was, because I'm really passionate about local foods and supporting the local food system, but it notoriously can be expensive, and it's just a real stumbling block for me because I want to reduce food miles. I want our food system to be closer to home, especially when you talk about local perishable foods in the summertime, where most climates you can grow produce but how can we make that more affordable and accessible? Do you have any thoughts on that?
For me, that's a really good question. And I feel like we're still trying to understand that concept, right? Like, again, that's nothing that we're taught as dietitians to like figure out what can we do. And like Ashley mentioned, you have to kind of work with what you have, unless you do have that opportunity to provide the access or be taught how to create the access for yourself. I know that, of course, when we think about like these big corporations and how they do farming versus local, it's a bit of a gap in the sense of like the financial part of it. And that's something that me, honestly, I'm still learning about today, you know, being in North Carolina. This is a huge belt for agriculture. And I've been able to visit like certain local farmers. And then you have your huge farmers where it's like, wow, that's a big difference in what they're producing and just the cost of it all. I'm hoping for, what I can say is I'm hoping for, and I think a vision for Eat Well is to have some type of like food hub that we, you know, can have in different areas, you know, hopefully crossing fingers, we're speaking this out loud, to different areas in the US that really need it or who may be in a food desert. And those food hubs, I think, is so important for us to have the entire community involved. For instance, here in Raleigh, I had the privilege of going to a community meeting that they had for the Southeast area of Raleigh, where it's a huge area of food deserts. And I remember talking to one of the directors of the co-op. It's actually a Black-owned co-op organization. And she mentioned to me, she's like, I love what you're doing. You know, I'm glad that you moved here and you want to get involved. She was like, honestly, if I'm really concerned, the thing that I'm concerned about is the fact that Raleigh is a growing city and they're not involving the locals, right? When they're trying to make these decisions of how to make these changes. And that's something that me and Ashley take very seriously. You know, you don't want to come into a community and say, I'm here to save the day. You want to get to know them, you want to get involved, you want to talk to them, and you want to see if they really even want the help from you anyway, you know? And I think that's such a big mistake that we make when it comes to trying to get involved locally. So it's a journey, and I'm super excited to be able to make those contacts, but I think it starts with really getting to know the people, because the answer may not be going to support a local farmer because their local farmer may be 30 miles away.
Right.
The real problem may be, can we, you know, buy this lot as a community and get the people that were born and raised here to help with that lot to create a community garden and other activities as such.
That's wonderful. Did you have anything to add, Ashley?
Well, in South Florida, it's a little bit different just because most people here do not have a lot of land at all. You know, the houses here are closer together, and more of like the rural areas will be Homestead, which is probably 45 minutes from me without traffic. And then also Central Florida, like where Jasmine used to live, there's a lot of orange groves and farms and everything like that. But in Miami, you know, South Florida, no one has a farm or a lot of land. It's very rare, honestly. So I think for us, it's very hard because of the distance. So you would think about traveling to a farm, you know, would take you 30, 40 minutes compared to just going to the store, which may take you, you know, 10 or 15, depending on the area. But I can say that a very positive program we have here is called Farm Share. I'm not sure if they're national, but pretty much Farm Share, what they do is they take the remainder of their produce, you know, some of the fruits, vegetables that are going bad, well, you know, that are not bad yet, but, you know, some of them are blemished, different things that they can't sell at the store, and they give them out to the community for free. And I feel like that's a great way to introduce the community to farming, because sometimes we think that everything has to be perfect and pretty. And when you're farming and gardening, that's not the case. You get the fruits and vegetables as they come. So that's one of those doors that opens up, because I know that doesn't benefit the farmers as much because they're giving away, you know, produce. But at the end of the day, I think it starts that conversation. So maybe as those kids that they're giving to, or as the families that they're giving to, as they, you know, get older, or as they are able to, they may start buying from farmers because they'll remember that this farmer gave me produce at a time that I needed it. And now that I have the funds, I would like to support that farm. So I don't know how often that happens, but I like the fact that it's at least introducing the community to farmers, what they look like, what their produce looks like as well.
I really love that both of you are really, to me, kind of talking about examples of kind of bridging this gap to healthy access for healthy foods. And sometimes I feel like it's not really just one big answer. It's like all of these little things, all of us working together and creating programs, and it's all going to be different. Each community is going to be different. There's going to be different solutions, and it's like we all have to just get on this journey and work together and brainstorm and be creative. And there's just so many people doing amazing things out there. I've had an opportunity to visit a local farm that the farmer basically created an entire program to put at-risk teenagers to work on the farm. And then they also learn to sell it at the farmer's market. So they're learning marketing skills. And it's just 100% his project to give back to his community. And I know you probably could cite like 100 stories like that, but it's all of these inspiring stories working together that I think can make a huge difference. And there's so many opportunities in everybody's communities to give back. When my kids were in school, I volunteered to start a school garden. Like nobody would have done it, so that there are things that we can all get involved with. And that was one thing I wanted to ask you. I mean, if you could give some suggestions for dietitians or just people passionate about healthy food systems, how can they get involved in their communities to try to create this healthier food access and a better food system?
I would say it's honestly kind of like we get that question all the time, like, I want to start a nonprofit. Where do I start? And I remember me and Ashley specifically saying to, different people, how about you start and volunteer first? Like start there first before you feel like you just want to jump in and make a difference. That way you can start to observe and really assess, right? They teach us that all the time in dietetics assessment, right? Or being aware, because there may be things that you may not be aware of. All our culture is different. Like you said, different communities are different. And we really can't assume that, what's a problem in Raleigh, North Carolina is the same problem that's in Miami, Florida, because there may be two different things that cause the problem that's bigger at hand. So for me, I would say first, volunteer. And it doesn't have to be at the same place. It can be in different, programs or different areas. And then you get to see what your skill is or what your gift is that you can contribute. But then by that time, you've developed a relationship with these people. And that's more important, because that's where they begin to trust you. And they begin to look at you and say, oh, I know a dietitian now. I've never known a dietitian in my life. And now I know one. So I think for me, that's where you should start as number one.
That is so true. There's so many volunteering opportunities. I love that. Getting involved in your community. What about you, Ashley?
For me, my main thing is just sustainability, because a lot of people love to do projects. They like to, come out to an event, pass out food, go to the garden, move some dirt around one day, just do something light and say, okay, I changed the world. And yes, you did make an impact for doing that. But what happens tomorrow? And that was the big, aha moment for us in Haiti, because we haven't been able to go back because of, the pandemic and everything going on, but the changes are sustainable. So that's my main thing, just to work on more projects. For anyone who wants to be involved in the community, just think about sustainability. Think about, what can I do today that's going to impact generations? What can I do today that's going to continue to change and continue to grow even after I step away? And for Jasmine and I now, Eat Well has become, very like a national, program where we're working with people all throughout the US. And it's only two of us. So we can't be in all these different states. So we're really just trying to put more in place so that we can have sustainable changes, because that's what's really going to make an impact, being able to, continue to make an impact for years to come.
That actually is a perfect segue for my next question. And that is like, how can people support your efforts at Eat Well? Like, what can people do to get involved and help you in your work?
Well, there's a couple of different ways. We're a 501c3 nonprofit, so we're ran by donations. We got our first grant this year, which we're very excited about, through WW. Yes. But before that grant, we were purely funded off of donations. And of course, Jasmine and I, our personal money that we've been, trying to put into Eat Well to do the projects that we need to do. So that's a huge help. Just anybody who would like to go to our donor box and donate and support us, of course. But also another thing is volunteers. So a lot of times people think that they physically have to come out and volunteer. And that's how we used to be, honestly. But since the pandemic, we shifted and now we have virtual volunteers as well. So they can help us come up with curriculums. They can help us with recipes. They can help us with different programming or any of their skill sets. If you're a accountant and you want to volunteer with us, you can help us, with accounting. You can make a spreadsheet for us, different ways like that. So depending on what your skill set is, you can always find a way to volunteer with us and help us, because anything you do makes a huge impact to the communities we serve.
So people can help in their communities too, like, because you were talking about it's national, like you have a national reach. Like, how does that work with opportunities for volunteers? Did you want to ask that, Jasmine?
Yeah, sorry. Well, because of the pandemic, I know for us, it was kind of like, oh, what do we do? Like everybody else, we've been in person with these kids or these parents or these families. But when we say virtual, it can be as simple as, okay, you want to donate, the seeds for the participants that we're sending out for the potting class. Mm-hmm. Or it could be maybe you have experience as a farmer growing and you want to, teach a class. It can be something simple like that virtually, where you can make that national impact. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it's really just about turning on the computer, letting us know what you're good at, because we do have some people that prefer, administrative things like, how can I help you do this? Or how can I help you create this? And trust me, we take all the help that we can get, because we're not a jack of all trades by any means. And we would love to just really conversate with you to see how or what you've seen and how we can contribute to maybe an organization you're in or a church. We have a lot of people that reach out and say, oh my gosh, I need you at my church for Women's Month. I'm like, yeah, of course, we'll do something. So for me, that in a sense is volunteering, because you're actually spreading the word, right? Yeah. That number one, there are Black dietitians, right? Because there's not that many of us. So people are really excited to see us when they do. And two, that we can relate and we are really about changing and impacting them and really truly care about their well-being and their health. So
that's amazing. So I just want to encourage everybody to go check out Eat Well Exchange. Can you tell us your URL? And by the way, everybody out there, I have all of the links for today's live chat in the blog that goes along with this live chat. So you'll find everything that Ashley and Jasmine are talking about there. But can you just tell us what the name of the URL of the website is so people can visit?
It's www.eatwellexchange.org. Okay. And the same for all of our social media: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, everything.
Well Exchange.
Yes.
Great. So easy. People can find you easily. Yes. So I want to encourage everybody to go check out Eat Well Exchange, follow them on social media. You're just going to be so inspired with all the amazing work they're doing, and get involved, reach out to Ashley and Jasmine and see how you can help and make a difference. And I'm really excited because I got to do a cook along with you guys, which was so fun, by the way. Yes. I love the recipe. We did a grits with vegetables. It was so good, which reminded me of my mom's grits that she used to cook for me when I was little. So it brought back lots of memories. But you guys have fabulous recipes that are very approachable and very comforting, but healthy. I love what you're doing with your recipes. So they have shared their jambalaya recipe with us today. So it's going to be on the blog too. So you go check it out. And do reach out to Ashley and Jasmine. Thank you guys so much for joining me. This has been a fabulous conversation. I'm all inspired to do some new things, volunteer more in my community. I'm all inspired. So thank you guys. It's been great. Thanks for joining us. Bye.
Bye.